I always have to begin by correcting Eric somehow. There is never ample time for questions and answers. William James, one of the few philosophers who knows how to write, said that most of philosophy is meaningless because their questions don't make a difference. Which way you answer the question, if it makes a difference, makes the question meaningful. If not, not. He gives the example of a hunting expedition he was on with two other philosophers. They sat down and watched two squirrels chase each other around the tree. Philosopher A said to philosopher B, "Each squirrel circumambulates the tree, right?" "Right," said B. "Does each squirrel also circumambulate the other squirrel?" "No," said B, "because they're always in motion and neither of them ever catches the other or stays still." "Oh, yes, they do," said A, "because circumambulation is a transitive relationship. If you circumambulate the tree, you must circumambulate each other." "Not so," said B. They argued for a half hour, stalked off in opposite directions, calling each other hopeless dunderheads, and vowed never to speak to each other again. William James said, "I think I have just seen the history of Western philosophy." Many questions don't make a difference. For instance, Hegel, that paragon of meaninglessness, said that time is not noumenal but phenomenal. It's not really, really real. It's only apparently real. One philosopher, G.E. Moore, said, "I would like to ask Hegel, does that mean that I didn't really eat my lunch after I ate my breakfast, but only thought I did?" If he says that, he's insane. If that's not what it means, then why does he use such fancy words to say what we already know? I like that kind of simplicity. Socrates had it. And if there's any question that makes a difference and is therefore very meaningful, the question, is there a God? Here we are on a stage. Did anybody write the play? Or are we ad-libbing our lines? That's obviously a question that makes an enormous difference. Many atheists know that it makes a difference. Sartre says, the atheists of the French Revolution thought that God didn't make a difference. We want to discard this unscientific hypothesis. But meanwhile, we must get on with the business of living, which is to be good to each other and to seek the truth and to have children and to keep the human race going. Why, says Sartre? He prefers Dostoevsky. If there is no God, then everything is permissible, but nothing is meaningful. It makes a difference. Freud, another atheist, knew that the existence of God made a difference. He classified religious faith as a species of insanity, collective insanity, which of course it is if it isn't true. Imagine Jimmy Stewart in that old movie, Harvey. He believes in this 16-foot-high invisible rabbit, Harvey. He's the most important person in his life. He always consults Harvey before he makes a decision. He talks to Harvey. Harvey doesn't exist. Well, if you believe in God and God doesn't exist, you're more insane than Jimmy Stewart, because God's more important than Harvey. So obviously this makes a difference. Different kinds of gods make different kinds of differences. The bigger the god, the bigger the difference. The pagan gods make differences. If you believe in Neptune, you might placate him so that you can survive a storm at sea. But if there's one God who is omnipotent and created the universe, then he makes all the difference in the world. The difference between non-being and being, that's an infinite difference. If a God can bring you from danger to safety or from disease to health, that's a pretty big difference. But if a God can bring you from non-existence to existence by the act of creation, well, that's an infinite difference. So the most important question is the existence of God, and the most important kind of God is the Judeo-Christian Muslim God who creates the entire universe, who makes an infinite difference. So let's talk about whether such a God exists. Can you prove that God exists? Yes and no. All proofs have limits. To prove that I exist, that's rather more difficult than you might think. to prove that this podium exists. That's quite possible. But can you prove everything about the podium or about me or anything else? Well, no. You can only prove a slice of something. And that's certainly true of God. And I think the slice of God that you can prove exists is a very thin slice indeed. It's enough to refute the atheist, but I don't want to give anybody false hopes. I do not think that you can prove everything the Bible means by God. But I do think that you can prove that a being exists that has some of those attributes. If there is a God, then he must be to us something like we are to a snail or a slug. And we must know about as much about him as the snail or slug knows about us. So if we're to know any more than that thin slice, he has to take the initiative. Thus, the notion of a divine revelation and of the human belief in a divine revelation, faith and revelation are correlative terms like color and sight. Faith simply means believing in a revelation. The notion that God has revealed himself and that it makes sense to believe in the things that he has revealed, even though you can't prove them, that in itself is a reasonable notion, although I don't think it can be proved. But it's a reasonable notion because if you use an analogy and look at all the things in the universe in a kind of a hierarchy, you find that if you're thinking simply about an idea, like a mathematical number, then you have total control of the situation. It can't do anything. If you're thinking about a thing that's real, independent of your consciousness, like a rock, well, all the activity is on your side. The rock can't move away and hide and lie to you, but there's a lot of stuff about the rock that you don't know. Then if you look at a living thing, like a plant, you can't totally predict what it's going to be tomorrow, at least not as well as what the rock's going to be tomorrow. So that's even harder to know. Then when you come up to the animal level, well, you have to win the confidence of an animal before it'll reveal itself to you. Some people have a way with animals, some people don't. When it comes to another human being, the activity is 50-50. If you want to know somebody, that somebody has to freely choose to reveal themselves to you, and you have to freely choose to be open to them. When it comes to a creature superior to a human being, like an angel, most of the activity has to be on the side of the superior. Finally, when it comes to God, all the activity has to be on God's part. Now, that activity, I think, is twofold. First of all, God creates you and gives you a mind, which is by nature capable of reasoning back to its creator. Even Frankenstein could do that. But then God also supplies needed to know information that the mind in its present state is inadequate to perform. Thus, the notion